So today's theme, of course, is the earth goddesses. There are three main different earth goddesses, and what's amazing about this system, the Greek system or understanding, is that we've got Gaia, who's kind of, and this is Gaia here, Gaia, who's kind of the impersonal earth mother. She's the larger consciousness. She is the fullness of the earth being. And then we've got Rhea, which is here behind me, and she's more the direct environment. So she's more what we see and touch around us, whereas Gaia is impersonal. And then from there we've got Demeter here above me, and Demeter is the earth that we cultivate. So she is agriculture. She is the fruit that we grow. So it's the more conscious process of working with the element of earth to cultivate what it is that we desire. So in this session, we're going to talk about those three different levels, those three different messages that those goddesses hold. All about earth, all about feeding ourselves and nourishing ourselves, all about manifestation, but they kind of tell, each one of those tell a different story and reflect a different nuance. But before we start, of course, we'll do 20 breaths and we'll do a little visualization, and then we will go into our theme for the day. So let's just start off by closing our eyes. Let's take a long, deep breath. 4 short breaths. Long. 4 short. So just keep your eyes closed now. Feel your body as it is. And of course, your body is your earth element. So feel your earth, the bones, the flesh, the heaviness, that part of you that is held on the earth by gravity, that part of you that relates to the world around you through touch, through the senses. This is your incarnated earth aspect. And although often this seems like the main part of you, although often it seems like this earth aspect is who you really are, we also have the other aspects. And of course, the earth holds the water of our emotions, of our relationships. So as you feel the heaviness of your body, now feel the flow of emotions within that container that your body creates. So the water brings flow, it brings nurturing and nourishment. The water also washes, cleanses. So just feel like a cleansing wave wash through your body, wash through your emotions. So any emotions that have been feeling stuck, just let them be washed away by this higher frequency of water. This water that holds and carries love, that holds and carries nurturing. And now, as you take another long deep breath, Feel this air, this wind, this element of air flow into you. And this relates to your thoughts, your mind, your consciousness, which is also held within the body, the container of your earth. But these thoughts, this consciousness that is you, is already striving for something else. It's already striving for the non-seen, the unseen. So even though a lower frequency of this air element in you might be thoughts, the higher frequency is the connection to your highest consciousness, your soul, your spirit. So let your thoughts free up, flow, rise, reaching to a more godly aspect of you. And as it does so, it connects with the fire which connects you to the ether, the fifth element, which is the divine. And this fire is the energy within your body that keeps you warm. It's the energy within your body that digests. So this fire also transmutes what's happening in your body, in your emotions, in your thoughts. And that transmutation, like the goddess Demeter, allows cultivation. It allows an alchemy to take place that takes us beyond the raw materials of who we are, so that we can become our potential, which is perhaps something unseen or untouchable or untangible, intangible. But now as we take this time, we make space for all the other things that are possible. So as you sit in this space, just connect to your eternal self, which is the you that is beyond this body, beyond this lifetime. It connects all the different lifetimes, all the different soul aspects of you. It's called the eternal self because it is eternal. It's beyond time, it's beyond space. It's that part of you that just knows without understanding how you know. It's that part of you that guides your destiny. It's that part of you that is eternal. And as we expand this consciousness outwards into the eternal, way beyond, perhaps you just get a feeling of surrendering, just surrendering to not knowing, surrendering to the ineffable. And just let that surrender give you a sense of peace. You don't have to hold on to anything. You don't have to understand anything. And as you just expand outwards, upwards, downwards, get a feeling of peace, feeling perhaps even a tingle of excitement. Connecting to your eternal self. That you that lives beyond. And just remember that now as you connect to this, even if you can't conceive of it, just imagine what it would be like. Or pretend that you're just expanding all the way out. As you hold this consciousness now, just be aware of pulling it back in, bringing it back here into your body. This eternity, calling it into your body. And again, perhaps you feel it as a tingle or a butterfly in your stomach sensation, or as a joy, or as an expansion. Put that into your body somewhere. Maybe it's even a place that's been feeling heavy in the last while, where energy hasn't been moving, or where you felt some ailment or aches and pains. Just put this eternal, unfettered energy into your body, into a place within you. And as you give this feeling of eternity to your body, to your material life, just get a sense of peace, that it's all going to be all right, that it's all taken care of. And now take a long deep breath to intensify this feeling of eternity within. And a little bit later we'll do another breathing exercise to connect to the earth within ourselves. For now, just return to this time and this place by opening your eyes, being back here in the room, awake and alert. Good. So we'll start off our session by drawing a card. So I've made these mock-ups of my upcoming deck. I'm really hoping to get it ready and printed this year, but it's nice to kind of have the mock-ups to see what's going on, see how they look, how they work. And okay, so the card that we get today is Pontos, which is the element of water, which is the sea, the spirit of the sea. It's not quite the same as Poseidon, because Poseidon is more of the emotions and how the emotions reflect in personality, in one's own personality, whereas Pontos is that impersonal energy of the sea. Just like Gaia, one of the goddesses we're going to talk about today, is the impersonal element of earth. And of course, Pontos, as this element of water, relates to relationships. It relates to our own inner emotions. So the card coming up for our reading today, that means that, perhaps deep emotions are coming up from different places, unknown places. And if nothing else, they're coming up because we're entering a new emotional state. The Pontos card, or, these element cards in my deck, they always relate to a new beginning. It's a new foundation that's being laid. So when Pontos comes up, it says new ways of feeling inside of yourself. It says, new relationships coming into your life, perhaps, new friendships, old ways of relating are falling away, new ways of relating are being created. So in this time, it might feel vulnerable, but the transition is short, and just trust that what is being created on an emotional level now is the right thing for you, and it is getting you to a place of greater emotional integrity. So yeah, Pontos is one of the protogonoi, the primal gods, as is Gaia. And what's kind of interesting about this, and I just want to show you the other cards here relating to Gaia, because this relates very much to the element of earth, and what we're working with today is earth. The first energy after Pantheos was the energy of chaos. Our word chaos comes from that, and chaos was the energy of the raw materials of matter before it took form and became defined. So that, of course, implies that chaos is, one could even say, the atoms, or the elements, not the four elements, but the elements of science, the elements of consciousness before they gain some form of definition. And then Gaia was kind of the first step in defining um, the creation. So she was conceived as the Earth Mother. She was conceived as the first kind of defined divinity. And out of Gaia sprung Pontos, the god that we draw today, as well as Uranos, which is the god of the sky, or the element of air. So there we have the element of earth creating the element of water, which creates the element of air, and then the element of fire, light, comes to that. So that that's kind of the creation myth of the Greeks, summed up very briefly. But the reason why I think that's quite important is that Gaia is the fruition of the seed, which is chaos. So chaos is the message that makes the seed grow, but it's that message unmanifest. And then Gaia is the manifestation of that seed. So, for example, when you get a tiny little, let's say you get an acorn, and that's the seed of an oak tree. That seed itself isn't fully formed yet, so it's not Gaia yet. So that seed is kind of chaos. It's kind of the potential. But then once that seed has been planted and that seed grows, its fullest extent becomes Gaia. And that, of course, is important because of the principle of manifestation. So, when we have an idea, we have a seed, and that idea is the actual seed. It's the potential of what could be. But many factors could prevent that seed from growing. And those factors relate to the goddesses that we're discussing today as well. Gaia is the impersonal potential of what that seed will become. But then we have to have the environment be right for it. So then we have to have Rhea, which is the environment, work. So we need to have the rain, we need to have good soil, we need to have a good microclimate to allow that seed to grow. And then we need Demeter behind me, which is the cultivation aspect. So Demeter isn't just simply fertility. Demeter is about putting in the thought and the care and the effort to prune, to water, to fertilize the seed. And then once that seed is grown, to kind of, let's say, train it. Maybe if it's a vine, you're going to train it along a pergola, for example. Or, you're going to fertilize it or prune it. And of course, pruning is a very powerful symbol for the process of, death and rebirth. In winter, the leaves fall off, let's say the vine, like a grapevine, then you need to prune it in order for, better growth to come back the next season, take care of it, and then the fruit will come in the next season. And that's exactly what the process of spiritual manifestation as well as spiritual growth is about. So, when we go on these journeys of self-development and transformation, whatever type of journey that is, we are, generally speaking, pruning, or we're really we're getting rid of parasites. We're sort of spraying insecticide and fungicide, so that plant can cultivate and grow and become something better. It can bear fruit. And then, of course, if we use the metaphor of the vine, or even the metaphor of wheat, Demeter is specifically the goddess of wheat. That wheat or those grapes are then harvested. They're then processed. They then ferment. They have to ferment. Wheat must be ground and fermented in order to become bread. The grape juice needs to be fermented to become wine. And that is the process of real cultivation. So, within our process of spiritual growth and rebirth, fermentation, and that's also a principle of alchemy, fermentation is necessary to help the raw material change state and to become something else. And always with fermentation, that change of state is kind of miraculous. Okay, one could say scientifically, it's a fungus, or it's a culture that's growing, and it changes the state. But the amazing thing about fermentation is that it actually preserves food. And civilization wouldn't be possible without that sort of preservation, of the bread, the wine, the cheeses, the yogurts, that sort of thing. It changes the states, so that we can literally live longer because we can preserve the food. Therefore, we can survive through winter without having to move on to other places, for example, and therefore we can flourish. And the spiritual lesson there is very powerful, and I'm going to go through some of those steps, very specifically, geared towards manifestation, and also using the 4 elements as part of that. Because for those of you who know my work, I always talk about how the 5 elements, how we are made up of the 5 elements. And when we focus on the element of earth, we're focusing on the element of manifestation into our physical world. We're focusing on our health, focusing on optimizing our bodies, maybe fitness or eating better. So we're really putting consciousness cultivation, Demeter stuff, into the physical body, and then therefore into the world out there. When we're focusing on water, we're focusing on creating relationships. But usually for water to feel contained and for water to be able to be effective, it needs to be contained. It needs to be held, either as, let's say, a pot, or otherwise as a channel or a canal. So again, that earth is integral in allowing the water to express itself healthily. And that, of course, is our emotions, our relationships, that can be expressed healthily when we have a good physical health, when we are manifesting in our life in such a way that we feel kind of safe and prosperous and stable. And then of course, we've got the air, which relates to our minds, our thoughts. It's our thoughts that give shape to the earth. It's our thoughts that allow us to plan ahead, not only gain inspiration from out there, take that inspiration, put it into the earth, and then work on creating it outside with our hands and feet, but it also creates an aeration, meaning that if we get too stuck in the earth and stuck in the water, they are both heavy elements, so they tend to sink and stagnate and get heavy. So the air brings aeration, it brings movement. So it brings movement, inspiration from the outside. It gets things moving so that we can not be so heavy in the water and in the earth aspects, and that we can start to move. And that's where fire comes in. Fire is the element of action, of passion, of movement, of doing. And in order to do, we need to be fired up in some way. Either we need to have energy in our bodies, which comes back to health, or we need to have inspiration that's kind of pulling us towards something. So that fire element is important. And then if we take the metaphor of the 4 elements, and we use the metaphor of clay, of course, the clay itself, let's say dry powdered clay, is the earth. Then we add water to make it malleable. Then it's through the air that we form that. It's our ideas that form that clay. And then the air helps dry it, having kept its form. And then the fire is firing the clay, which then makes it hard. It makes it change state, and it becomes something else. So what before was powder now becomes like a hardened pot that is durable, that can last thousands of years. And then that firing process, that magic of transmutation, is the 5th element, where it changes state, where it becomes something else. So it's almost like Gaia it's kind of the alpha and the omega. Gaia is the raw materials, but Gaia is also the potential of what will or could happen in the end. So in that sense, Gaia is very impersonal. And, modern scientists, talk about the Gaia principle, where they say that our earth has a consciousness, and this earth consciousness kind of balances out the environment and balances out nature. And I mean, I think that that's a very interesting, concept for scientists to come to. But it kind of really does make sense on a spiritual level that something as big as planet Earth has a consciousness and awareness, and it knows what to do to balance things out. And of course, there's a lot of talk about environmental imbalance, and I certainly don't doubt that. But on the other hand, I do kind of trust Gaia more than I trust humans. So I do think, there is there's going to be some sort of balancing out that takes place. And even though we might be creating a lot of imbalance, I don't think that Gaia, I don't think that Gaia feels that we're bigger than her. So, there is this process also, of course, of growth with, with the environment and with what's happening in the environment. And it is a process, it's a process of coming to awareness, whereby before maybe we just took the environment for granted. Now through this process, we are learning to understand it better, respect it more, return to a space of reverence. And then as a result of that, hopefully, helping to cultivate with the energy of Demeter, helping to cultivate an approach to the environment that can, be one more of stewardship and caring as opposed to of exploitation. So Gaia is that alpha and omega. So Gaia is that clay that started off as a powder, which then had water added to it. And Gaia is also the potential of a clay becoming something that could be a pot. Because of course, sea sand can't be molded into a pot because sea sand isn't malleable. It's not clay. So it doesn't have that potential. Other things can be done with sea sand, but clay is something else. So, for us in our personal lives, and of course, wanting to relate this to our own manifestation, we have to know and understand our material. If you are a person who's physically not very strong, you're not going to be able to become a construction worker. Let's say, traditional style of construction work. You could drive a truck. But, what I'm basically saying is it's like you're given, let's say, a particular body with particular strengths, particular weaknesses. So there's no point trying to be something that you're not. So it's a question of, first of all, looking at the material. And I use the body as one example, but of course that relates to your nature. If your nature is more artistic, you're not going to be very good necessarily at mathematics. Or if you're more mathematical, you're not really going to necessarily be very good as a lawyer. So the first step is kind of understanding our potential. And that understanding of our potential, I believe, really comes from knowing and observing what we love in life. And because I think we're given a personality, which is our soul aspect. If we are made up of 4 elements, earth, water, air, fire, that's our soul aspect that gives us our loves, our interests, the things that we enjoy doing. I don't think that happens by chance. So the first step in knowing ourselves is just observing what gives us joy. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it's being a lawyer and fighting for justice. We've all got something that we love. That might be very lofty, it might be very simple, but even in the simplicity of things, there is a message. Because in the simplicity, we can always find a way of turning that into a career, for example, or turning it into a skill that we have in life. So if you love reading, but you have to do a job as a waiter or waitress, developing the skill of reading, for example, could allow you to become an editor, for example. So it's taking what we love, looking at what we love and what we do with minimum effort in our lives, looking at those things and reflecting on what it is first, and then reflecting secondly on how that expresses itself in our life. Are we using that in a positive way? Are we using that passion or joy in a negative way? Are we using it to grow and create flow in our lives? Or are we using it or are we stagnating? Are we not using that skill and ability? And that's causing us to stagnate, because I think very often I always say that, that when things in our lives are flowing, it's kind of a sign that you're going in the right direction, or that you're doing something right. When things are resistant, of course, it's because energy is holding back. So a part of you, it might be an emotional part or whatever, is holding back. So it's not allowing that flow to happen naturally. Sorry, we've got a storm coming here. So when we're in flow, it's kind of indicating what's working. Sometimes, a certain aspect of what we love could be in flow, but another aspect is not, because we're ignoring it. We're allowing it to stagnate. We're not letting the water stagnate. So it's often nice to look at the areas that are flowing in your life, the areas that are resisting in your life, and to see if maybe they connect in some way. Maybe, for example, maybe you love reading, and just again using a silly example, maybe you love reading, but you find you're a bit dyslexic, or you read very slowly. So that makes it difficult to read. So then it becomes a question of finding ways perhaps to address, the slow reading. So maybe you want to actually put consciousness, cultivate, with Demeter, cultivate that skill in order to become something else that you can better and best use a raw skill or ability that you have. So it's that observation, that's the first step. And then beyond that, it's actually the decision to cultivate that and to do something about it, to listen to the call, and then to do something about the call. And that's often the hard one, because it's hard often to make sense of, what it is that we want to do, or what it is that we do best, or how best we can serve humanity, or how best we can develop ourselves to the maximum. So it's actually heeding the call and doing something about it. That's the important part. And very often, and I think this is a very good rule that applies in all things in life. Very often, it's just a question of showing up. It's just a question of doing the thing that you love, and making time for it, making space for it. But again, with consciousness. So it could be on an artistic level. You might feel that you love art, but you don't have the time to develop it. And you feel that inside you are an artist, but you haven't developed the skills. The only way to do it is to show up and to do something about it. And that is where we start to come to the Demeter aspect, of the Demeter aspect of the earth goddesses, which is where we pick up the raw materials, and we actually start tinkering, we start playing around, we start figuring out the material and seeing what it can do. So if, for example, you've always felt you want to do ceramics or pottery, you've got to first pick up the clay. You've got to first see what clay can do, what clay can't do. For example, some clays are very malleable, and you can very easily form a pot with very thin walls, whereas porcelain, it's not malleable at all. So when you build it up to a certain point, it starts to collapse. So it's like that, understanding your materials. And it's, again, when we've played with the materials, that we can understand them, and that we can do something about it, and that we can take corrective action. So that is where that's also where time comes in. So on the one hand, we're cultivating, we're putting in the time. On the one hand, we're showing up, but then on the other hand, we're giving it the time and space to become a process. And it's only ever through process that manifestation can happen, which is time and space. Process is time and space. So, we can do workshops, and there can be a huge amount of growth over a weekend, and that seed can be planted. But very often people get impatient, and they think their lives should be completely transformed after, let's say, that weekend. So people get impatient, and they sort of feel that they haven't achieved as much, or they've gone steps backwards. But that's never the case. I think we all know that when we do profound work, and when we stick to that profound work, when we keep showing up, after a few years, we can really see how our lives have changed, and how that process has brought about something different in our lives. And of course, we've got the Gaia side, which is the potential, but we do need the environment. We do need the Rhea to be able to flourish. We need to be in the right place. So if we're not in the right environment, we can always overcome our environments, but we do need the right environment to do so. And that might mean creating the right environment. You might live in a city that you hate, or in a circumstances, relationship that you don't like, and you might know that that's not supporting your growth. So then it becomes a question of changing or transforming the environment. It's only when the environment is right that we can start to transform. So that, again, is where this consciousness comes in of what is my potential? How am I expressing my potential in the world? How is my environment supporting my potential? And then whatever the answer might be is, what can I do about that? And again, that's where Demeter comes in. Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, of course, but she's the goddess that goes in, that negotiates with Zeus the return of her daughter Persephone, who had been abducted by Hades. So, Persephone is the goddess of spring. She's taken underground. She's abducted by Hades, the god of death. And because she ate a seed, a pomegranate seed, she could never return back to the earth as an innocent youth again. So Demeter is her mother. Demeter then negotiates through, I guess, basically blackmail. She says, well, if you don't let her come back, I'm not going to allow the crops to grow, and then the humans are going to die. So then eventually the gods allowed Persephone to go back for a given period of time. Of course, spring and summer is when Persephone returns to the earth, and when the earth flourishes, and when Demeter, her mother, is happy. And then in winter, Persephone goes back into the underworld. And of course, that takes us back to that metaphor, that symbol of the seed. So the seed then goes underground again in order to be reborn in spring to become a plant again. So it's that process of Demeter having to go into the underworld, having to face all of her grief of having lost her daughter, that she can then create the rebirth of life every year, obviously in colder climates. So that rebirth can kind of only happen as well with putting in the effort. Otherwise, again, if we didn't have using a metaphor, if we didn't have the bread and the wine and the fermented goods in the winter to be preserved and to carry us through the winter, we will die of starvation in winter because there's no plants around us, or only limited plants, let's say, metaphorically speaking. So it's that kind of preserved life from the summer that is fermented and turned into something else that takes us through the winter, that can carry us into spring for that rebirth. And of course, in our own lives, the symbolism of that is that, when we do the work on ourselves, and this could be personal work, or it could be, following through on the things that we love, creating the career or the relationship that we love. But it's almost that principle of, when the times are good, it's about soaking up and working with the energies that are presented to us, refining them, fine-tuning them, and then allowing in the difficult times those resources to carry us, those inner resources that we've built and developed, so that we can then be reborn. And in terms of manifestation, that relates to patience, of course. Winter is the month of patience. It's the month of not impatiently waiting the end of winter so that we can return to spring. It's the process of finding the inner peace, finding the reflection, finding the inner light in ourselves when the outer light is at its weakest. And that takes us to some very simple principles of manifestation then. And with manifestation, the phases, in my opinion, are, first of all, we need to have the ground, who we are, has to be right. So we have to be healthy. We don't need to be super duper healthy, but we need to be healthy enough in ourselves, because we need a container. And that health, or that vibrancy is not only about what's happening in our physical body, it's also about what's happening in our life. Is how good is our relationship with our outer world? How can we make things happen? How can we react to the outer world to make things happen? And that's kind of where practical magic comes in, or where action comes in. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But the first step is to have the body, the environment of Rhea, ripe for us to start manifesting. And then we need to plant the seed. We need to take that seed and plant it. And I really believe, and I've spoken about this a lot, manifestation is not possible unless you can experience it, feel it viscerally within yourself. If you have belief systems that prevent you from creating what you want to create, and they're stronger than your desire to manifest, the belief systems are going to win. So, for example, if you want to create a relationship or attract a relationship, and your belief on some level might be, I don't deserve a relationship, or I'm not good enough, or relationships have always failed me, or I always get abandoned. If that belief is sitting very strongly in your earth, in your environment of your body, which of course reflects into your outer world, when that belief is so strong, and then you get this little seed of thinking, I want a relationship, you've got to obviously plant that seed. But that seed has to be planted in fertile ground. And that, of course, is where the deep visceral work comes, the transformational work. There are always ways of manifesting in a slower way in our lives by doing our day-to-day things. But of course, when we are doing the spiritual work, this work of transformation, we are speeding things up. So we're speeding the seasons up. We're finding ways to transcend the seasons so that our growth can be faster. And that, of course, is what alchemy is. So let's say, for example, if you keep going back to the same metaphor, let's say that, the natural cycle is 1 year, spring, summer, autumn, winter. And, in that winter time, we need the time of the earth lying fallow and, rotting and fertilization taking place in its kind of natural way. And having time for reflection, time to see in that time of darkness. When we speed that up through transformational work, it no longer becomes a whole season. It becomes really compressed and condensed, and that's what we want with manifestation. That's why manifestation is magic, because we're making it happen so much faster. So that's why when we do trance work, breath work, teacher plant work, ecstatic dance, all of those very transformative practices, we're speeding up the natural seasons, we're speeding up the natural flow, and then we are having, more violent reactions than we would normally have if it was just sort of a flow of a year. So that would be purging in different ways. That would be having moments of intense epiphany where the vision is compressed into kind of a symbol or a package that we can really understand a whole lot faster, as opposed to it taking a long time for that idea to form. Of course, after, let's say, the trance or ceremony work that we do, we also need that time and space to create. But when we're doing that work of transformation, we're compressing it. And the fact that we're compressing that year, those 4 seasons into a smaller space, means that it's going to be a whole lot more violent. So going back to this image of planting the seed in our deeper beliefs, when we do that, we are cleaning out that soil. We're getting rid of the poisons or whatever is preventing growth, those bad beliefs. We're purging them out, literally out of the physical body, and we're making way for that seed to have free space, to have openness, to start growing. So, manifestation can never just be an idea of, oh, I want this, and I'm going to think about it every day, and I'm going to send it positive thoughts every day, and then it'll come. That's kind of possible, maybe in extreme cases. Usually that sort of just sticking in the head doesn't work. It needs to be visceral, it needs to be planted. And then, once we've planted that seed, of course, we can't keep digging it up and making sure that it's germinating, that it's growing, that it's safe. Then we've got to leave it. Then we've got to let that seed germinate, take root, do its own thing. And that implies that moment or that time of kind of darkness, of not knowing, of giving it the space, the time and the space to start growing. And talking specifically now about our prayers or our intentions. So that is where the faith needs to come in. And again, we can use the Demeter energy of fertilizing and watering that seed that has been planted, you know, putting energy into developing that intention, for example. Again, good lifestyle choices. But basically, at that point, we have to hand over to the divine. We have to hand over to the message of that seed, to let that message of that seed start to grow and to find full manifestation. So that sense of faith then comes in. We have to have faith that it is going to grow and that it is going to manifest. Because if you keep thinking, did I plant it right? Is it germinating? Am I doing everything well enough? That creates a whole lot of sort of tension and creates a whole lot of disruptive energies to the actual growth. So it's that faith of saying, okay, now I'm just going to let go and I'm just going to trust that that's happening. And of course, if that seed grows healthily, it will start to sprout. You'll start to see the signs, and then it'll start to grow. And those signs, of course, are always very important. And I always say when it comes to breath work and ceremonies and other work, it's let's say the actual session that we might do together is the planting of the seed. But it's what happens in life afterwards where you start to see the shoots coming out, that you know that seed is really taking shape. And then once you can see that, of course, that's going to augment your faith. And of course, it's going to make you trust more because you're starting to see the results. And then you can take greater steps. You get greater feedback in your cultivation process. And again, that's where Demeter comes in. So it's that consciousness, that awareness, it's that observation of how things are growing that gives inspiration. And that's also at the point at which we can start to plan ahead and say, okay, my little seed has grown. I'm starting to get the signs that it's growing. But that's going to become a great big tree. So what actions, what steps can I make now to prepare for it? Or a better metaphor would be it's going to become a vine. I've got to build the pergola structure in order for that vine to have somewhere to grow. And that's then where we start to take the action. We've planted the seed, the manifestation starts to show, but then we've got to do something as well. We've got to use our hands and feet in order to let the vision find its fullest and best expression. And that I think is where that role of inspiration into action comes in and becomes very important. We get the inspiration, but then we've got to do something about the inspiration to give space for the inspiration to expand. So manifestation is never just a case of, okay, well, I've asked for it, I've done all the right things, and then God's got to provide all the right circumstances. It's just got to be there. No, we've got to keep cultivating. We never arrive in our manifestation process. It's never this nice little package that's all together and then we can just kind of park off and enjoy. It's a constant process of cultivation. And of course, as the seed grows and as the plant grows and as we cultivate, we can also start to see what we want to change, directions, steering in different ways, so that our life keeps staying or remaining this garden of fruits and flowers that might be flourishing at different times of the year, so that it's constantly sustained, it's constantly well kept and maintained. And of course, again, just going back to the card that we worked with, that we drew today, Pontos, the water card, and also the goddess Tethys that we worked with recently. She's the goddess of nourishment. The earth goddesses are nothing without the goddesses of nourishment, of water, very specifically. So the earth in itself is cold and dry and kind of dead, but it's the water that gives space. And of course, that's the emotional aspect to manifestation. When when we start creating something, when we plant that seed, it's our emotional connection to that which we want to manifest that allows it to grow. So it's that constant watering, it's that constant giving it love, it's that constant sense of creating and imagining the space that we will have once this garden has grown. So, when we plant the seed and the garden's, just soil, we're having a vision on some level. We're saying, well, okay, it might look like desert now, but I'm going to water it and I'm going to look after it, and it's going to become this beautiful garden. And our imagination is already telling us what that garden would be like, and why do we want that garden? What will we be doing in that garden? How will that garden make us feel? And that's another very powerful way that we can create fertile ground for our manifestation. It's not just to think, I want this in my bank account, or I want this relationship, or I want this spiritual growth. It's about how is that going to make me feel, and imagining it now, already enjoying that experience in the now, so that emotion, that love, already starts to feed the vision that's been planted. So on that note, we'll close for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Wonderful to see you. And we will be in touch again very soon. I'll let you know when the next sessions are coming up. So have a great day. Sending lots of love. And do stay in touch. Let me know how you're going.